Hello. Good day, everybody. Get the sound working this time. Okay, so this is a Q&A. Basically how it works is you go to slido.com and you type in the code and you can ask questions there. Turn down the music a bit. So you can ask questions there and then I'll answer them. So we'll wait a little while for the questions to come in. But basically that's where you ask the questions. And I'll be answering the questions from there. I won't be answering any questions that are in the YouTube chat. Because it won't display on the screen. So we just you slot it. Alright, hopefully that's better. More lighting. It's dark here now. Let's change this over here maybe. Okay. Does anyone need a QR code? I don't know if anyone needs a QR code. I think I saw bigger too. So as I said previously, in order to ask questions, you go to thislido.com link, and then you basically type in that, or you can scan this QR code. Works on your phone as well. And I will make an attempt to answer them all. These things usually go for longer than I expect. Longer than most people expect. They usually just take a while to get going. So we've already got a question from Anonymous, but I'll start answering questions when a few more come in. Actually, that reminds me, while we're waiting for more questions, g'day Pushington. While we're waiting for more questions, we will do the giveaway. Alright, let me hide my face. Okay, so giveaway, basically, if you comment on the video, you can win a copy of the book. Basically, I'm doing this for all of my videos from now on. So at the beginning of each of the videos, I'll be giving away a book. So it'll just be random. So this is the link of the last video, I think. 10 comments sounds about right. So anyone who commented, you got a 1 in 10 chance of winning. Not sure whether or not this includes the live chat, so it might only be comments after the fact. Anyway, let's go for it. Alright, who do we have today? Julian Boisvert. Hello. His comment was that he'd love to read my book. Alright, great. Julian, you can just send me a message in the Discord if you don't know how to get to the Discord group. You just type in Zenith Poker, and then you join the Discord group. And then you'll be able to find me somewhere. So just send me a message, Julian, and I will get that book to you. Alright, so that's that. Another thing is that if you're in the Slido, you can vote for other people's questions, and other people's questions will show up further at the top. Let's try that. So I got one from Anonymous and one from Sensational Pumpkin. And yep, Julian, you know who you are. Send me a message through Discord and you will get your book. And anyone who is watching this video afterwards can comment below to get into the raffle for the next book. All right, so who do we have in the YouTube comments? So we've got Andrew, we've got Pushing Tin, we've got Halokias, sorry, I butchered that. Chatting X24X, Cock 666999, so great name, and Guillaume 999. Molded channel, chance, I don't know how to pronounce that, it's French or something. Pushing Tin. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty long question. See if you can simplify it or condense it a bit and then ask it in the Slido, because I won't be answering any of the questions from the YouTube comments, just because if it's in the Slido then it will show up on the screen. So then people later on can view this and understand what I'm talking about. 3 clubs on Discord, pumpkin, cool. Nice to meet you. Okay, let's get to it. All right, so this is the first one. So Anonymous asks, how did I get my start in poker? What would be the single biggest piece of advice you would give to someone starting out? So how did I get my start in poker? So how did I start playing poker? I think I started playing poker just live in my friend's basement or something. And then in terms of getting better, what did I do when I started? It's all buried because it's a shit time. I'm pretty sure I played like over 1 million hands at 2-0. So I don't recommend anyone do that. So yeah, don't do that. There's a lot better ways of getting better than just, you know, smashing your head into 2-0 and throwing shit at the wall. Single biggest piece of advice to someone starting out is to get a solver and use good preflop ranges. Because even if you don't know what to do postflop, if you use good preflop ranges, then it's much more difficult to make the same sort of mistakes. Hold'em is it's actually about more than half of it is the preflop street. More than half of your EV comes from the preflop street. So because that's the case, in terms of the number and size of the mistakes you can make, you should be studying that street. You should be pretty damn good at playing that street. So yeah, preflop ranges, and then get a solver, get GTO plus basically. Or if you want to splash some cash and do some really fancy shit, just go straight for Monka. Monka solver, I believe now is Monka solver version 2.1.9 or something. It's pretty dope, but it's a lot. It's way more difficult to use than GTO plus. But Monka, you can do preflop and you can do that kind of stuff as well. Alright, who we got in the chat? Any Pam? hopefully I'm pronouncing that reasonably well. So yeah, thanks Anonymous for asking that question. Alright, so remember, you can vote for other people's questions and I'll answer them first. I'll try to answer all of them. I usually do. But in the off chance that I have to leave early, it's best to get the questions that people want answered first. Otherwise it'll just be first come, first serve. First come, first serve. So yeah, please vote. Okay. Alright, so Sensational Pumpkin is asking, what are the most important spots to solve and study? Depends on the game that you play. So if you're playing a lot of cash game, then you should be looking at a lot of the spots on the button, just because you'll be playing against the button or in the button position most frequently. So basically, just study all the spots related to the button. Each process would say them first, as well as blind versus blind. So once you study blind versus blind, and then all the spots related to the button, you'll have a better understanding about how to play the rest of the spots. In terms of sort of the importance of what you should be studying, you should, in general, be studying a breadth of different spots rather than a depth. Studying one thing too deeply too soon isn't going to do so well. So like for example, here, for example, here in Early Access Lite, if you have Early Access Lite, all of these I would consider pretty much essential. Maybe not so much button, big blind versus hijack, because you can get a lot of that from big blind versus cutoff, which I don't actually have done yet. But big blind versus hijack here, big blind versus button is coming soon. The big blind versus button 2.5 has already been done. It was done in 2020 to a reasonable standard. Nowhere near as in-depth as these solves, but that's that. And then if you get Pro, then you should have 2.25. These are some other interesting spots that you can look at, as well as 200 big blinds deep. But basically, if you're playing a lot of cash games, then you should be looking at the 100 big blind 2-bit pots and 3-bit pots related to the big blind and the button, and the small blind as well. So kind of in the order of importance would be button, and then it would actually probably be big blind, and then button, and then small blind. Big blind is involved in a lot of different pots, but a lot of times those will be sort of single res pots. A lot of interesting stuff happens on the button because the button is the second player. Usually the player that defends the pot second most often, but they'll be defending that often by 3-betting or playing the single raise pot in position. So yeah, study spots related to the button, and the big blind. So, thanks for that, Sensational Pumpkin. Remember to vote, everybody. Alright, whatever. Can you show us your hardware rigs behind you? Yeah, okay. I mean, this one... I've got two here on the floor. Connected to just that one screen. So one of them is a 256 gigabyte. So the one that's currently on the screen is running a Monkasolver sim. Haven't upgraded that machine yet from Monkasolver 1 to Monkasolver 2. That's got 256 gigabytes of RAM, and I think it's got 2 CPUs. It's like an old server. And the other one is a it's only got 64 on it. This computer that I'm talking to you through has got 64 gigabytes as well. Both of those have a Ryzen 3900X. So yeah, a Ryzen 3900X with 64 gigabytes of RAM will do most sims reasonably well. You won't be able to like look at the really wide range 2-bet pot sims, but narrow range 2-bet pots does it okay, and then all the 3-bet and 4-bet pots you can probably get away with running with 64 gigabytes of RAM in GTO Plus, and you can do a lot. You can do a lot with Monkasolver just because of its abstraction and preflop stuff with 64. So especially Monkasolver version 2, because it's got the compression, the faster algorithm that works better on the CPU. So yeah, works does quite a good job there. And besides those two computers, I've got how many more? I think I've got 7 more. 7 more? 8 more? So I've got two Threadripper machines. So they're the Threadripper 39. So this is the Ryzen Threadripper 3970X. So it's two of the exact same build. And that's with 256 gigabytes of RAM. Those are currently right now Linux running Monkasolver. Basically, it's the only program that's on that machine. Those machines. So yeah, those two Linux, the Threadrippers. I've got a couple of 3900s. I think they're 3900 XTs. That's a CPU. With 128. So if you know anything about the 3900s, the Ryzen workstation machines, they have a maximum RAM of 128, if I remember correctly, just because of the motherboards or something. So I've got 2 of them. Got another old server very similar to the one behind me. Actually, I've got 2 servers that are similar to the one behind me. One of them's 256 and that one's 192. Although both can be upgraded to 300 and whatever double 192 is 384. I just haven't got around to that just because like those servers they use a lot of electricity for the amount of solving that you get, and the CPU isn't it's not as good as these other ones for the amount of electricity that you put in. Those servers are really cheap to buy, but the electricity costs are really high. So as a result, I'm going to be installing solar to bring down my electricity cost. And I can buy whatever cheap fucking hardware I want because I have electricity for it. Was that all of them? I think I've got like another couple of 64 gigabyte machines just lying around somewhere. I'm not sure if they're on right now just because I don't know if I need any 64 gigabyte sims. Yeah, 64 gigabyte sims just aren't competitive. A lot of the time. I mean, they're competitive if it's your only machine, right? But it's not competitive compared to the 128 and 256 gigabyte stuff I've got. So yeah, thanks for that question. Whatever. Who have we got in the chat? Andrew says, "Whoa, yeah, I've got a lot of computers, and they're basically just all running poker sims, 24/7." Okay, so Anupam is asking, how do we track poker study progress? Are poker results the only way to evaluate how well you've studied, assuming that there could be variance? There's a few ways. You can either poker results. There's always going to be variance. Okay, so you can get the poker results. Another way that you can track how much you've learned is by playing against the solver. So in GTA Plus, Snowy, I think Pi has it now as well. Basically, most solvers will, most of the basic solvers, postflop solvers will allow you to play against whatever solution that there is. And playing against a solution, it'll give you a score or something to tell you how well you've done, or how many mistakes that you made. So in general, you want to reduce the total number of mistakes that you're making. Another way you can do it for pre-flop. So if you have the viewer, actually everyone has the viewer. You should be able to get this for free. The 100 standard, you should be able to get that for free, as well as in the trainer, right? So you can basically just play against the viewer. There you go, just preflop.poker, and then you just click on the trainer, and then you'll be able to play against it. Yeah, there's a lot of different sims you can input, but everybody should get 101 standard for free, and then you basically change the configuration, narrowing the starting ranges, and narrowing all of the opponent's ranges. Right, look at different filters and that kind of stuff. So let's say you can train pre-flop, and it'll tell you how many mistakes you're making. So let's just say, for example, big blind versus all open. And when filtering by spot, villain's range is predetermined. And will give us the top 50% hands. Okay, so that's the configuration we're using, and then we just take seat, and here in this one, if I remember correctly, I haven't used it in a while, but the RNG, you get scoring based on your RNG. So here the cutoff is raised, and it's forwarded to us on the big ones with aces, and our RNG is 45. So we need to pick the best raise size to throw it over the cutoff. It's obviously going to raise. And that's going to be... Let me get this right. This one was off. Yeah, so I was off by 10 points in the RNG, and you got a score of 69.1. Right? And you should be able to get better and better scores as you keep going. Small blind raises, so folds to small blind raises, and we're here, we've got RNG of 43, it's going to be cool, right? And then it gives you a score. So basically you can play against it for ages and ages, and this is filtered to top 50% of hands, so you don't have to, look at all the hands that you fold. And that's how you can trade pre-flop. Let's try this one, 83. What size is that going to be? I mean, if I remember correctly, basically, just plots it with everything. In the new sim. So that's that. So lots of ways to do it, but playing against the solver is a pretty good way, and you'll be able to track your results that way in terms of the scoring system. So thanks for that, Anipam. All right. Okay, so Anonymous is asking, how do you deal with bad situations happening in real life and your ability to play poker? I'm going through a breakup and feel emotionally unstable after 2 months. That's a tough question. It's okay. So dealing with the bad situations in real life, just being able to deal with them in general will impact your ability to play poker. I mean, playing poker for a lot of people, for the majority of people, I would say should just be a hobby, and not your main source of income. And I've said that multiple times in the past. Or if you're just like starting out in life, you don't really know what you want to do, and you just want to ape into it, and just go full degen for a year or two. That's fine too. Just don't think that you're going to be some high stakes pro in 2 years and then keep that lifestyle forever, because that's not going to happen. If that's the case, then don't play poker. Okay, if it's a case where you're playing poker as a hobby, you should just not play when you're feeling bad. Or if you want to play for the sake of playing, you should just drop down to a lower stake than you normally play, and so you don't risk as much. That's my best answer for it. Usually it's not a great idea to play poker when you're feeling bad, regardless of what's actually happened in your life, because lots of shit will happen. Life is just a whole bunch of challenges, one after the other. So you gotta deal with it, and it's gonna be your emotional kind of response to what's happening. So I mean, shit will happen to you, but you as a person get to choose how you respond. You have almost no control over what happens to you, but you do have full control over how you respond to it. You can't control what other people say about you. You can't control the fact that, X, Y, and Z happen with your relationship, but you can control how you respond to it. So in terms of how that relates to poker, I don't know if it relates specifically to poker, just the specific advice is when you're feeling bad, don't play. But in terms of, dealing with shit happening in your life and feeling emotionally unstable, just remember that the way that you're feeling is, it's entirely, well, almost entirely, it's well within your control. To say that it's not impossible to change the way that you're feeling. The way that you feel about X, Y, and Z happening is a response to the way that you're thinking about X, Y, and Z happening, and the way that you're kind of acting in response to that happening. So the first thing that I would kind of recommend in terms of dealing with tough things in life is to think about, try and identify the feeling that you're getting. So like you've said you're feeling emotionally unstable, but try and identify exactly what that feeling is. So name that feeling. And then also write down what thoughts are occurring in your mind that leads you to have that feeling. And then choose to think something different than those thoughts, because you, in your own mind, can control the way that you think about yourself. A lot of people are pretty critical of themselves, like in their own, and I'm guilty of this myself. In their own head, they'll just beat themselves up, sort of metaphorically. They'll kind of say X, Y, and Z to themselves. That it's just fucking horrible if you wrote that shit down or said to someone else. Like think about the stuff that you're thinking to yourself about yourself, and think, if I said that to someone else, would I not get punched in the face? And you would get punched in the face so quickly if you said the things that you say to yourself to someone else. So just don't think that shit, right? Like there's no reason to, and it's one of the main drivers of why you're feeling bad, because the way you're thinking is in response to something that's happened. But you get to choose how you respond, and then in that kind of sense, the way that you're thinking can influence the way that you feel. And then there's other stuff like brain chemistry, blah blah blah, and no one's got any control over that. That's just genetics, and previous environment, which over decades of whatever has caused you to have a particular brain chemistry, but that I don't think is a specific problem. So a bit of a tangent there. John, if you want to ask a question, you've got to ask it in a Slido. But I live in Australia, and I think everyone knows that. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question, Anonymous. It's a bit of a two-parter, but I hopefully answered both parts. All right. So yeah, remember to vote, so you can vote for other people's questions, and that'll show up to the top. I will take a 2-minute break to drink some water because I've been talking for a while. But yeah, please vote and ask more questions. Alright, let's get back to it. Alright, so Rusty Bowl of Mayonnaise, hello. Asking, can you give structure to my studies so I can feel some kind of progress even when not certain of my success? This is probably related to it's probably also related to Annie Pam's question here. For studying spots, is there any database in Excel prepared for all the necessary information for that spot? And what JG has done with his studies as well has been pretty good. If you read his blog in the Discord. If you try to avoid all the trading crap that he writes. I mean, if you think trying to be a professional poker player isn't right, trying to be a professional trader is even worse. He's doing pretty well. Sorry, I'm trying to dig through all of his posts. Basically, he's gone through a bunch of spots and in Excel and Word and whatever. He's written notes. So it's not necessarily that you need structure. You can feel progress by writing notes. Because then you end up accumulating a bunch of notes. It doesn't have to be notes in like a Word document, it could be notes in Excel or whatever. But both of these questions are kind of related, Anipams and Rusty Bowls of Mayonnaises, in the sense that you get progress by, you get the sense of progress by writing notes for what you've studied in the past. And then that makes it easier to go back and quickly revise some stuff that you've studied. And you've always got to go back and study the same stuff over again. Even I don't remember every spot all the time off the top of my head. Like you've got to study it, and then you've got to go back and study it again. And that's how you get better and better at the game. And it goes back to breadth versus depth. You don't get good quickly by studying one spot really deep, because that's what's almost never going to happen. You get real good real quick by studying a variety of different spots over and over again, and so you get good at everything simultaneously, and then your overall understanding of the game ends up changing a lot. My understanding of the game's always improved, and so you look back at yourself after every 6 months, every year that you're playing the game, and then you're like, well, I understand the game a lot better now. And the way that I'm thinking about the game is a lot with preflop stuff, and rather than just like individual hands, it's like, how do you construct your preflop range for this particular spot? So say you hit sufficiently many boards well enough and be able to defend on those boards, and etc. It's like, how can I construct my preflop range in a way that plays well against this particular player or pool of players' preflop strategy and postflop strategy combined, so you end up like defending with, and you see the solver does it as well. Like the solver always defends with a we'll go back to this. The solver tends to defend against like 3-bets and stuff with so let's go 2.75, 7.05 with a combination of like pocket pairs and suited broadways, and some of the stronger offsuit broadways, right? Like the suited and connected hands aren't really in there. So that's a 3-bet pot defense range, and you'll see that this is a very similar theme throughout. And so like you need, like even for like early position kind of opens and then like falls to the small blind, like this way that the small blind defends against this small open is very similar to how most people would defend against a 3-bet. You open and defending against a 3-bet out of position. Like it's a combination of like the sort of broadways, some strong offsuit broadways, and like the pocket pairs. And so like that combination of hands in the range ends up meaning that on a variety of different board types you'll have both value and bluffs. And so like when you end up playing against weaker opponents that don't really have that particular combination of hands in their preflop range to defend, you can just run over them. Either they don't have the pocket pairs, they don't have the suited broadways. Is usually they don't have the suited broadways or the offsuit broadways. Like some of the suited broadways, they just don't take that line with preflop, and so then they end up just never having bluffs when the board is low, or just never end up having value when the board is higher. And you see that kind of trend throughout, and even like hijack open and the falls to the big blind, it's the same kind of idea, just the range is a lot wider. A lot of pocket pairs, and then like suited broadways and suited connectors, and then offsuit broadways. So like you can kind of consider like these king 2 suited to queen 2 suited, like the suited high card hands, and then like these are the offsuit high card hands, the offsuit broadway hands. And once you understand that and relatively how strong everything is, you'll end up getting a better idea of how to construct your preflop range for every spot that you face. That's a bit of a tangent. That is not answering your question. Oh yeah, structure. Write notes. Have a bit of set a bit of a goal for yourself. So just write down. There's different ways that people have done it. Some people like have yearly goals, and then monthly goals, and then weekly goals, and then kind of daily goals. Definitely if you're like kind of a self-improvey kind of person, and self-improvement's a bit of a because like it's fine to like try to improve yourself, but it's a bit of a tangent. Well, I'm full of tangents today. It's fine to like try to improve yourself, but like a lot of people come to self-improvement with the view that they're like wrong or something's messed up with them. And it kind of goes back to that self-critical thing. Like you can be very self-critical, and then because you're so self-critical, you end up wanting to improve yourself, and you fall down the rabbit hole of self-improvement. And then like, you know, the whole fucking self-improvement and gurus and shit and whatever make, you know, loads of money off people that are just too critical of themselves. It's fine to improve yourself. Just don't be critical of yourself while you're doing it. Just don't shit on yourself, like, because everyone shits on themselves. If you don't shit on yourself, you're a fucking narcissist. Where am I going with this? Sorry, what was the question again? I've totally lost my train of thought. Yeah, goals. So one way you can do it, and I've like gone through this with students and friends and stuff, is you set like you write down, you know, 5 or 10 things you want to accomplish in that year, right? And the reason why that's a 5 or 10 is a decent number is because like most people can focus on 5 or 10 things, and like you can set your goals like reasonably, set your goals reasonable, that you can achieve them, that they're actually achievable goals, not just some fucking weird shit out in the middle of nowhere. So like set a reasonable goal that you can achieve, right? So say for example, you've got goals in different categories, like say for example, you've got goals related to poker, you've got goals related to your health, goals related to your finances, and then you set one goal for each of them. At the beginning of the year or in the middle of the year and whatever, right? And then you can just kind of aim towards that and just go back and once every few weeks and then read what goals that you set for yourself and just try and remember them in the back of your head. And then drilling down, you're going to set yourself smaller goals at the beginning of each month or each week, or have whatever block of time that you want to accomplish it. So those goals are a bit more they're smaller than the yearly goals. And then you can have weekly and kind of daily goals about, things that you would do during the day or during the week that you want to accomplish, right? So say, for example, you're focusing on studying, right? Studying for anything, like how do you study for anything? You set yourself goals of things that you need to study. So I need to study this, and this. And recently I was doing it for my med school exams. I had like 3 books to read. And these are like thick ass books. This one here. This is Tally and O'Connor. This is a beast of a book. I love it. This is an amazing book. I think they're at like 9th edition or something right now, but yeah, it's 600 pages, and if you want to be a doctor, you should know the majority of the shit that's inside here. Like the back of your hand. So yeah. Well, if you want to be a good doctor, you can be a shit doctor and not know that much. Anyway, where was I going? So you set yourself goals. What you're gonna try and achieve. And so one of the goals that I had was to get through some of the books. I didn't accomplish all of them, but I think I did alright during my exams. It's gonna be the same thing for poker. You set yourself goals in terms of, like, say for example, you've got early access and you've got the simulation sets there for you, right? There's a shit ton of them. One way you can do it is you can spend like an hour in each one, and then you kind of tick it off, and you've looked through the sims for an hour each, right? And then you get a bit of an overview about how to play that spot, and then once you've done everything, you go back around and do it again. And trust me, if you do that for an hour each, and you manage to go through every spot that's in the sims, then that's a lot of stuff, right? So like here, for example, it's early access light, and we just want to look at blind versus blind. Ignore the singles for now, but blind versus blind, how many is that? So it's 11 different databases, and if you spend an hour in each one, it's 11 hours. And if you're doing that like for 2 hours a day, that's already a week there. So then you spend a week on that one spot. And trust me, if you spend a week on blind versus blind, you'd be pretty good with blind versus blind compared to a lot of the opponents who don't fucking study at all. Like, no one fucking studies this shit. So, or if they do, they don't have proper sims, they don't have proper preflop ranges, and they just don't understand it. So in terms of studying, you just need to study more than the other guy. Study more than the players that you're playing against. If you understand that spot better than they do, then you're going to make money off them. It's as simple as that. So set yourself goals. Write down what you've done, and maybe you can do stuff like checklists in terms of those sims, because there's so many databases. You just study an hour each of them, and then in terms of the database on Excel, is you just write down whatever, and then your first hour you can tick it off or whatever, however you want to do it. So there's that's my recommendation, and then sort of drilling the preflop as well. So like studying from the solver work and running his own sims is totally different. You can, if you have really good sims, you don't need to know how to make good sims, right? If you don't have good sims, you're fucked. So use the sims that you get in early access, or if you haven't bought early access yet, the free ones, and at the end of this year, all the ones from early access 2021 will become free. So all of them will become free either on the 1st of January or a few weeks afterwards. I'll probably stagger the release just so that no one's downloading everything from my Google Drive at the same time. Yeah, goals, multiple things going on. Thanks for those questions, Rusty and Anupam. Stick that to that one. How are we going in the... How are we going in the in the chat here? Okay, SKPTK1. If you ask a question in the Slido, then I'll answer it, because then it comes up on the screen and then other people can see it afterwards. I mean, I want to answer your question, and just if you copy and paste it into the Slido, that'd be good. Okay, so... Alright, so Pushing Tin's got 2 questions here. Let me hide my face for a bit. Okay. Oops. Wrong button. Undo. Okay, so Pushing 10, I'll answer both questions at the same time. Alright, so this is a 2-parter. So if there's a large equity gap between 2 players, does the player who has equity advantage bet more often and bet a small size? And the second one is if there's a gap in the top 20% of ranges, the player with strong hands should bet larger non-advantage. Face back. So I don't really understand the second part of that question. This is... We'll try and answer them both. Okay. Large equity gap between the 2 players. Player who's an equity advantage bet more often and bet a small size. In general, the player who's got an equity advantage has is going to be the player that's betting. So it depends on whether in position or out of position. So like if there's a large equity gap between 2 players, if the player with more equity is out of position and the gap is large enough, then they're usually going to bet everything, because it doesn't make sense to check back and let them realize any equity or whatever, right? And in those cases where the out-of-position player bets everything, the in-position player will overfold. And that's one of the... It's sort of like a tangent rule of thumb to the 50% rule. So like if you remember, the 50% rule is that the out-of-position player should construct their checking range such that the in-position player can't bet more than 50% of the time. That's what's going to be happening here all the time, right? So, and you can see it a lot when the equity gap is small. So when there's not a lot of when there's not much of an equity gap in terms of range versus range, but there's difference in the overall construction of the ranges. That's where you get this sort of nut advantage versus range advantage thing appear. So a lot of the time, in the big blind defense spots, so one of the players in the field opens and the big blind defends. The reason why the big blind checks everything is because their range on average is really weak, and they've got a lot of hands that have called preflop in order to basically see a flop, and they don't they get pretty good odds because the opener opened whatever size, usually a small size, and then the big blind has the advantage of seeing that X number of players folded before them, in between them and the opener. And because that's the case, that's where the big blind picks up some equity back, because they can call and try and draw out against the opener. So because they've called and tried to draw out against the opener, they will often be at a quite substantial equity disadvantage on a lot of boards. And as a result, if they have a very strong hand, say for example they got a pocket pair, flop to set, flop to straight, flop to flush. Flush is maybe less so. But say for example they flopped a very strong hand like a set, right? A set or two pair with whatever hand that they had. That hand represents a very small part of the big blind's range, and because it represents a very small part of the big blind's range compared to, you know, the loads and loads of combos that have just missed, with a very small amount of equity that needs to be denied, the big blind would actually end up making more money by going for a check raise, because check raise is going to be very successful. If the big blind just bets themselves, say for example they make a pot size bet, right? If you make a pot size bet, you remember your alpha, right? Alpha for a pot size bet is 50-50%, right? So you make a pot size bet, you expect your opponent to fold half the time. So the big blind, if they just potted it there, the in-position player would fold about half the time. And that ends up making the bluffs that the big blind could use indifferent between bluffing and making that bet. Assuming those bluffs have zero equity, which all of them, zero EV, which all of them will, because the alternative is to check and then fold to a bet. So the in-position player, the opener, calls half the time, right? But the alternative is that the big blind checks, and then the in-position player bets, and then the big blind raises, so it goes for the check raise. And so the check raise ends up winning two bets, right? So it wins the in-position player's bet, plus, you know, it's got, if they make a pot size raise, they got a 50% or whatever chance of, it's not actually 50% because the in-position player is going to be folding all their bluffs, but 50% of the remainder, 50% of the value component of the flop betting range will continue. So they get that second bet 50% of the time, right? And that second bet as a percentage of the pot size on the flop, the numbers end up working out such that that percentage ends up being 50% of the time, right? So check raise pot. So then the question is, if the opposition player donks, they donks for pot, right? They're gonna end up getting called half the time. But if they check and the opposition player bets, they end up essentially winning two bets more than half the time, right? So then the question is, how often does the in-position player bet, right? And in order to, and the math usually works out that in order to essentially make those strong hands indifferent between leading out as the opposition player and checking, is that the in-position player has to bet about half the time, 50% of the time. So that's a 50% rule. But when the equity gap is large, that usually means that the out-of-position player, well, the equity gap is large in terms of big blind versus in-position. That usually means that the big blind has a lot of junk in their range. Okay, and so they, and conversely, they don't have enough very strong hands to effectively defend that checking range. So what will happen is that the in-position player will bet more than half the time. And they bet more than half the time because the out-of-position player doesn't have enough check raises to prevent that. Another way you can look at it is that the out-of-position player's just got a lot of junk, and more often than not, they'll have junk, right? And so the in-position opener will want to deny equity from that junk. And they'll do that often by betting small. The reason why they're betting small is because they're trying to avoid the check raise, right? If you're betting small with almost your entire range or a large portion of your range, usually you're going to have a medium strength hand. That medium strength hand is still stronger than the out of position's hand on average, but you're essentially trying to avoid the check raise. The check raise is going to happen pretty often, because the out of position player has basically checked everything, and so they've used all their strong hands in that checking range to go for the check raise. In position player will still want to deny equity on the flop, so they're going to be betting more than half the time. And you end up getting this kind of result where the out of position player checks, the in position player bets more than half the time, out of position player overfolds because the in position player has checking EV in terms of the bluffs that they could use. The in position player can always check back and see the turn, and then play the turn in the river. So any potential bluffs that the in position player can use on the flop, they need to be made indifferent by the out of position player folding sufficiently many hands, and usually that means the big blind is going to be overfolding by quite a substantial amount, because when the equity gap is very large, the in position player just has loads of checking EV, because they can take lines like check back flop, check back turn, stab river, and they can do that profitably with air all the time. So given that there's lines like that in the game tree, because the out of position, because the big blind is so wide from pre-flop, the big blind just has to fold the flop. So they're usually going to be overfolding the flop. So hopefully that answers your question, pushing 10. That particular question is specifically geared, I think you mean towards the big blind versus in position spot. In spots like small blind versus big blind, similar kind of things going on. So small blind opens usually a tighter and very polar range compared to the big blind's calling range. So in that particular spot, the small blind will have a checking range, but they'll actually start betting. They'll either bet pretty frequently or they'll check and go for a check raise, and it'll be kind of still respecting the 50% rule. And the big blind will usually want to be stabbing into the small blind's checks about half the time, in order to deny equity from very weak hands. So the small blind pre-flop will be opening some junk, and then after they get called, all that junk will miss, but there'll be a lot of strong hands in there as well, and so the small blind ends up having to choose between either betting the flop or check raising the flop with those strong hands. And the big blind, in order to make the small blind indifferent to doing that, has to bet half the time. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, pushing 10. I've done multiple videos on the 50% rule in the past. I might do another just general tutorial on the 50% rule, but hopefully that little explainer helps you with your understanding of what's going on. And if it doesn't, you can watch those other videos, or you can rewind this one, and maybe you can slow down my talking, because sometimes I speak too fast. Especially when I'm talking about poker. For some reason, when I talk about poker, I speak really fast. Thanks, Pushington. Okay. Where are we at? JG. Hello, hello. Alright, so JG's asked, what's the best way to improve is to play focused and to really think about every small action you take and what it leads to. Do you agree? No. So, this kind of assumes that the best way to improve is to actually play, which is not the case. So the best way to improve is to study. But in terms of playing focused versus playing unfocused, a lot of the cognition that you should be doing should be done off the table. You shouldn't be really thinking about the hands that you're playing as you're playing them, in my opinion. Yeah, a lot of it should be just like gut feeling from stuff that you've studied previously. That's how you get. Well, if you're playing online, live is different because it's really slow. If you're playing online, like you need to play fast and you need to play lots of different. You're usually playing multiple tables at the same time, so a lot of it should just be feel. And you should be able to make good decisions on average at a quick rate. So that's how you increase your win rate in terms of dollars per hour. You end up making a lot of decisions really quickly, and usually those decisions will be correct. So like when I'm actually playing, I'm playing very differently to how I play on stream. When I'm playing, like I'm just blitzing through every hand, versus when I'm streaming, I usually slow down and explain things. When I play off stream, I'm playing very fast, and I'm not really thinking about the hand as I'm playing it. I mean, I'll think about it after the session, and try to get better at it afterwards, but I'm usually not thinking about it as I'm playing. So hopefully that answers your question, JJ. So yeah, I disagree with that statement. Alright, so remember to like everyone else's, other people's questions, and then they'll appear at the top. So who do we got in chat? Alright. I'll answer this one because I think it'll be pretty quick, but like other people's questions in the meantime. So SKP-TK1, hello. Comment on what you think I should be spending for a budget PC build that can handle all these sims. Look, to be honest, if you're okay with like using like secondhand parts and building it yourself, then you could probably spend like 1,000 American or 1,500 American. And you'll do pretty well. Like you can get 64 gigabytes of RAM with a really good, with like 1,300. I'm pretty sure you can get like a 1,300, $400 US. Let me look up for you. 1,300X. Let me check this. What is this? Where the hell does Amazon put its prices? I've got no idea. We're going 5900X. I mean, if you want to go for that instead. There we go. 829 new. If you get secondhand, you that's Australian dollars. I think I'll be getting them for around 500 Australian. So you can do the conversion to American. And then like RAM, 64 gigabytes of RAM will probably set you back $500. So yeah, all in all, if you get a secondhand build with 1,300 or 1,500, with 64 gigabytes, you should be about $1,000. Of course, then there's all the stuff to make it pretty, and you know, motherboard, blah blah blah. But yeah, 1,500 is probably a good budget, in my opinion. If you can't afford that and you want to go for something even smaller, you can just, you know, spend $500 and get 16 gigabytes of RAM with a 3700 or something like that, 3600, like an old CPU, and you should be doing all right. Yeah, in terms of the 128, you can do it with a 3900. Just go get the motherboard and then I think you got to do something with the timings. So if you want to create a 128 gigabyte machine, then you can do it with 3900. Just gotta get the right motherboard for it, because you would need 4 sticks of 32, and each stick of 32 would set you back $250 to $200 American. So yeah, thanks SKP TK1. Aaron else is asking, is there any spot where the imposition player would overfold versus check raise in equilibrium? Probably not. Because the imposition player's betting range has to it's constructed with the check raise in mind, right? So I don't think there's any spots that should be overfolding. Yeah. Because yeah, the alternative is because the outposition player is selecting bluffs from the 0 EV portion of their range, so the imposition player is not going to be overfolding because they make that EV 0. So if anything, the imposition player usually underfolds against the check raise when there's equity still, in order to prevent the outposition player from drawing too easily, from profitably getting you to fold and then using that draw to make their bluff cheaper. So yeah, Anonymous, hopefully that answers your question, but it's basically a flat no. Yeah, and it's because imposition calculates their EV by thinking about the check raise before they make the bet, essentially. How would you change the strategy if you have one or more straddles in a live game? I mean, I've got live cash elites for that. Live cash elites. Do I have any straddles? Where's my straddle? 200 1 straddle, 300 1 straddle. I think it's 200 1 straddle. Oh no, that's boring. 300 1 straddle. Yeah, I mean, it's not that different. In a live game where there's like lots of players at the table and it makes sense to have multiple straddles, you're really just min raising it. The reason why this is a min raise and it doesn't have any other sizes is because when I added other sizes and they were very quickly rejected. If anything, like if anything, Anonymous, like when you're playing live, you should be like you should be trying to play relatively exploitatively, because when you're playing live, you have more time to think about your hands, and so you should be able to think through all the exploits that you're trying to make as you're making them. So a lot of that is in earlier positions. You're going to be doing stuff like limp re-raising, because players play more aggressively against the limp than they do against the open, even against like a min open. And like if you've been playing tight and your image is very tight, which it usually should be because that's how you win money playing live, people will start to give you probably too much respect when you open. Like they think that I'm playing tighter than I am, like even though I'm not. I'm just like, my opening range isn't super tight. It's just that I'm tight in all the other spots compared to everyone else, and so they think that I'm tighter when I'm opening, which I'm not. So like people will end up thinking that you're tight, and then they'll give you probably too much respect for your min open. But then like some people, like if you're playing live, half the people you're playing against like are going to be drunk, so fuck knows what they're thinking. Or you get the good old. Where was in the bad beats? Bad beats chat. People don't fold calling the 6x open with king 2 suited and hitting. Yeah, don't open 6x with. Just don't open 6x on live. I mean, people think you should open big, but you shouldn't. Just it's not good. You should just open like normal size. Unless you've got like a really good reason for it. But usually when you're opening that big, like you've got a very strong hand. You shouldn't be doing it too often with a weak hand. Like most of the time the exploits work out that you should just be opening big with your strong hands and small with your weak hands. And like people overestimate how strong certain hands are. Like for example, like King Jack offsuit. No, just min open that shit. It's not a good hand. Ace Jack offsuit, not amazing, right? It's these hands, these big offsuit hands, they just get dominated so easily by 3-bets, and you just have to fold to a 3-bet. And they just don't have any backup equity in terms of suitedness. So yeah, don't open 6x with stuff like that. If you're trying to exploit the people that you think that you're playing against, like you need to think through the entire exploit, right? Because like the open size that you choose, and this goes into straddles as well, like how people play in the straddle. Like for some reason, people when they straddle, like they play very differently than if they were in the big blind, which is just odd because it's exactly the same. And if there's imposition straddles, it's a bit different as well. Do I have one with imposition straddles? I don't think I've got a sim with imposition straddles because it just wasn't worth it. Because it very rarely happens. So yeah, live if you're playing. Live if you're playing, you should just be trying to exploit the players that you're playing against a lot of the time. And how my strategy changes if a straddle happens is mainly just shifting the positions across by 1, and then tightening up as you get closer to the button loosening up as you get closer to the button because you're in position. So like then the button position will be somewhere between regular button open and cutoff open, and then when you're 3-betting people, you have to 3-bet tighter because there's 3 players behind you that haven't acted yet. So yeah, Anonymous, thanks for that question. Alright, how are we going? JG is asking one of my long-term goals in medicine. One of my goals in medicine, I'm going to work towards becoming a diagnostic radiologist. You know, those doctors that look at X-rays and CT scans and MRIs. It's a lot of time sitting in front of a computer in a dark room, which is what I'm doing already. Except then I get paid for it, and I don't have to interact with as many people. Of course, you still have to interact with people as a radiologist, just not as many as if you were like as a doctor that interacts with a lot of people, or an ED physician. I see loads of people. So yeah, thanks for that question, JJ. Remember, you can like other people's questions, and they'll come to the top. So if you want to get your, if you think that someone else's question is interesting, make sure to like it. Or if you're really cheeky, you can open a or a JG, like like you're in the OCE group. You can just ask. ask inside the group. But yeah, I mean, if people want OCE response to these kinds of stack depths, I was gonna add like 50 and 75 maybe, just to the standard ranges. Just the advanced pre-flop theory. 50 would be pretty easy, because like 50 big ones that you can solve on the back of a napkin, I'm pretty sure. That's a joke, but it's pretty easy to solve because it's so small. In terms of OCE, I mean, we're doing some interesting stuff with OCE, but we'll finish off the low rake 6 max first. Yeah, and then we'll decide where to go from there. So yeah, I've got one machine running OCE stuff right now. Alright, pushing tin. Welcome back. How does stack pot ratio influence the bet sizing? When the stack pot ratio is deep, the bet sizes go up, and when the stack pot ratio is small, the bet sizes go down. That's yeah, that's it. That's as simple as it can get. And that's usually like an average. In terms of like the flop bet sizing, when you're playing like 200 deep versus 100 deep, and like you can see in the preflop ranges, like here for example, this is just looking at this button open strategy, 52.57% folding versus 55.23. So 200 big blinds deep. I mean, it's a subtle difference, but you're opening slightly more hands, and you're opening for a slightly bigger size. And then, like, say for the same open size, folding to the big blind folding 52%, the same open size 53%. Right, so that's 52-53. That's usually because that's because of the slight difference in the relative strength of the ranges, but you know the folding ranges are for the same, and then the calling range has got to do with and the calling range changes based on the stack depth as well. And then when you get to the flop, and it's going to be more obvious in the earlier positions. So like hijack, for example, hijack 101 standard, opening 23%, versus here about 24%. You end up with the range asymmetry, then going to the flop with the slightly deeper stack pot ratio. The flop bet size might not change because, you know, of that whole dynamic which I talked about earlier of once the players come with his pre-flop ranges and see the flop, big blind's usually going to be checking a lot, and the imposition's going to be betting to deny equity, and those bet sizes usually going to be relatively small. Because they want to bet more frequently because of that range advantage. They want to bet pretty frequently into the big blind to deny that equity. So for the flop bet, might not change too much in terms of the relative sizes. Maybe go slightly bigger, but then definitely turn the river. As you get deeper, the sizes really change quite a lot. And then as you get like, yeah, it is usually turn the river, because after the flop bet, that check raise should have happened, and then going to turn, if the turn is a brick, then you're gonna have overbets, etc. Try and get all the money in, and those the sizes of those overbets will change, and then like in the flop check line, overbet probe on the turn will change in size as well, and so you just end up with bigger bet sizes at the end of the game. And then like in the 3-bet pots and 4-bet pots, where's my face? And then in the 3-bet pots and 4-bet pots, you're going to have the same sort of effect. With the 3-bet pots, lower stacked pot ratio, so in general the bet sizes are going to be smaller. And then in the 4-bet pots, the stacked pot ratio is tiny, and then you end up with tiny bets. And with those very small bets, because of stacked pot ratio, usually both players will get the money pretty thin. Because the ranges are usually wider than people think. And so like any pair is the nuts in a 4-bet pot. I mean, to be fair, any pair is the nuts in a 3-bet pot as well, but people don't really understand that. I'm all right at limp pots, just make fair. Alright, thanks Bushington. Okay, so Anonymous is asking, any reasons you think even players playing 5k or now plus like Linus, etc. shit in poker or true for any human? Yeah, all humans are shit at poker compared to what solvers can do. It's just the game's too big. So it's like saying, I mean, poker is bigger than... Poker is heads up, even heads up and hold. I think it's bigger than Go. And Go for ages was like, that game was enormous, so like people couldn't wrap their heads. But like you couldn't create a computer to do it, to like brute force slightly like they do chess, so they just did neural nets. And they've been pretty good now. And then poker's interesting because of that information asymmetry component. And it's difficult to brute force, even though that's what we're doing with the solver. In order to kind of brute force it to pre-flop, you need like really heavy abstraction, and even then you don't get a perfect number of bet sizes. And you end up with much fewer bet sizes than what you could actually probably do. And with the more recent stuff, with like real-time, like depth limited is the correct word. Like depth limited solving, like you can end up with a particular node in the tree and then solve to the end of the game if you're playing against it in real time. And like most computers will be able to, most fast computers should be able to do that. Like even just desktop hardware, they should be able to do that. Basically just resolving the subgame in order to find the answer. So if your opponent throws a bet size at you which is different to any of the bet sizes that you have in your game tree, in your abstraction of the game, you just resolve it with that bet size incorporated and then play from there. So yeah, thanks Anonymous. Yeah, everyone is shit. Just remember that. So if you want to get to 5k now like Linus, just remember that everyone is shit. You just have to be less shit than they are, right? Okay. Remember to like the other questions. I'll just answer them in order. Questions flying at me left, right, and center. This is almost going for 2 hours, but we'll keep it up nevertheless. Is it worth playing in a live game with double straddles and short stacks? Feels hard to get a big edge of most pots, just all in pre or on the flop. Yeah. So where does your edge come from? Your edge comes from knowing how strong your hand is. And so if you understand how strong your hand is pre-flop and on the flop, you'll have an edge. So you just have to understand how strong your hand is compared to everyone else's hand and how often it goes multi-way, blah, blah, blah. Usually what's going on is in a live game, the rake will be very high. And so because the rake is very high and there's double straddles and short stacks, you end up you're just paying too much rake as a percentage of the pot that you get. So say, for example, if you're just all in on the flop and then they take, like 5 big blinds of rake or some shit. Yeah, that's just not great. So thanks, Anonymous. If you have an edge, you have an edge. If your edge is greater than the rake, you can make money on average. Just accept that live, you're going to have a lot of variance because people are there to gamble. So they're going to make actions that intentionally increase the variance, like even subconsciously. Even if they want to win, like they're kind of there to gamble as well, so they're gonna make action. They're gonna take actions which increase their variance. And Pam, please talk about your pre-poker session routine. But before I play, I pretty much always look at a sim or two for amount of time, for like half an hour. That gets my mind kind of warmed up. Either that's a sim that I'm currently running. For like some of these pre-flop sims, you can look at them in the middle of the run, or like I build a sim that I'm going to run later, or I just study some stuff which I had on my checklist. So before you play a session, that's when you usually want to be doing your study, in my opinion, because that gets your mind warmed up and in the right zone to be playing the game. And you do it for half an hour, an hour. Anonymous asking is, I find that big overbets more than 300% of the pot have a bad risk-reward ratio compared to smaller overbets. What do you think about that? I mean, sure, you got a bad risk-to-reward ratio. Is this for like a bluff? If your opponent folds, you just pick up the pot, and if they call, you lose your bet. So they should be folding at a very high frequency when you bet more than 3 times the pot. So for example, you just bet 4 times the pot, right? They should be folding like 80% of the time. If they're not doing that, they're either overfolding or underbluffing. Sorry, overfolding or underfolding, and so you can construct your value range accordingly. There's usually pretty good reasons to be making these very big overbets. Yeah, sometimes you just need to get the money in as soon as you can, and you do that by overbetting the turn. You get a big overbet on the turn. I'd say after you bet small on the flop, and then it becomes a brick on the turn, right? All of your strong hands from the flop are now very strong on the turn because your opponent would have raised any hands that were stronger than it on the flop. So a lot of them will want to be overbetting the turn, and then ripping the river. But some hands, don't be afraid to take the overbet turn line and check back river, because some of the hands that overbet the turn for value can often check back river. So say for example, you got something like ace king on like a king 7-2, like a common line is you bet small on the flop and then overbet the turn and check back the river unimproved. So that's how you get your 3 streets of value by only playing 2 streets. And then like your opponent's range gets narrowed quite a lot. But in terms of the risk reward ratio, like if you're not confident in terms of like making big overbet bluffs, you should be playing against a solver, looking at the sims which have those overbet lines, and then looking into them more often and thinking about what bluffs go into there. When you're overbetting, say the turn, or for example, the main big overbet here is going to be in the turn. So for example, the big blind check line, you overbet 4 times the pot. Think about what bluffs you're using, and making sure that those bluffs can outdraw the hands that will be calling that overbet. Because they can't outdraw it, there's not a lot of point putting that bluff into that size, because you usually want some kind of draw equity against the calling range. Or you want to block it real hard, and if you can't do that, then yeah, draw against it. But the blocker effect usually is much more important on the river than on the turn. On the turn, you still want some equity. So yeah, thanks Anonymous. Is it true that when playing live, if you have at any point in the night have both a shot and a beer in front of you, that you are likely going home with someone? I don't understand the question. I don't know of anyone who plays poker and want to pick up. It's a bit of a strange thing to do. So thanks for that question, SKPTK1. I mean, go home with someone. It depends how much money you win, I guess. Okay. Look, we've been going for almost 2 hours now, so I'm gonna put out a last call for questions. And also, if you've made it this far, remember to like the video as well. And if you're watching this afterwards, comment below to get into the draw to win the book, Mastering Poker. So I'll be giving out one of those basically at the beginning of every live stream, every live stream video. So yeah, please comment if you want a copy of the book. Okay, doke. Last call for questions. So we'll finish this off. Anonymous is asking, usually increasing the size overthrowing a pot gets you one big blind EV gain with none of combos. More chance for mistake with bluff and value selection. What, one big blind is a lot. One big blind is a lot of EV. Yeah. Look, what one big blind is a lot in terms of EV. For an individual hand, it's a lot. One big blind is like 100 big blinds per 100. So like if you're not making that overbet, you've made 100 big per 100 mistake, which is enormous. It might not feel like that, but that's just the way it is. So like I try to avoid making any of those mistakes. So like making this mistake by not overbetting costs you one big blind in EV with that particular combo, which is a lot. Chance for mistake with bluff and value selection, you just need to get good at deciding what is bluffing and when, and you do that by practicing either playing against a solver or studying all those lines. You study them to death, and then you implement it by playing it in person. I think this kind of comes, this like worrying about making a mistake comes from like you're worrying too much about the variance of the game, rather than like actually making a mistake. Like making the mistake is that you missed out on the one big blind in EV. That's the mistake. Bluff and value selection, you get better at that by studying. But if you make this one big blind mistake because you're afraid about, you know, variance or bluff and value selection, then you're always making one big blind mistake. So you're always making 100 big blind per 100 hand mistake, which you do 100 times, you've lost a stack, right? So yeah, thanks for that question, Anonymous. So Anonymous asking, on boards where button can bet more often than 50% on the flop versus the big blind, what factors would stop the button from betting the entire range? Usually in this particular case, the majority of the hands will be indifferent between betting and checking for the button. What factors stop the button from betting their entire range? It's usually just not as ideal. Certain hands win more by not betting everything, and certain hands actually prefer to check back. You want to have the ability to check back on the flop as the button, and you take that a lot of the time. You take that line a lot of the time, and it's got to do with like your pre-flop range construction. So once you start using multiple pre-flop bet sizes, it'll make sense. It'll make a lot more sense why you should have a checking range as a button against a big blind and in position against a big blind, right? Because if you're using multiple sizes, and even exploitatively, if you're using multiple sizes exploitatively, you'll really want to check back a lot of the time as the button, right? Because you just want to check back and draw because you've got a weak hand on average. Depends which of the lines that you've taken. So yeah, in terms of like equilibrium, the main factors is that if they're betting everything, some of their hands would change in EV, some of the hands will lose EV, some of the hands will actually gain EV, but overall their range EV is going to be slightly lower. And their range EV, given the pre-flop decisions, will... I mean, once you've gotten to the flop, you can't do anything to change your pre-flop strategy, but, you know, having the ability to check back means that you can exploit your opponents better by creating a pre-flop strategy which uses multiple sizes. And I don't know how many people use multiple pre-flop sizes, but I use loads of them. So yeah, thanks for that question, Anonymous. If you're not sure, betting everything just it really just avoids the answering the question of what you're doing with your hand at this particular node, and then pushes to the next street. Remember that when you bet, you end up putting money into the pot. So essentially, any bet that you make ends up donating to the nuts that the big blind has. And if you got a weak hand on average, you don't want to donate to the nuts. Of course, you want to try and get your opponent to fold their hand if you've got a weak hand, but a lot of the time when you open the button or you open in position, the big blind calls, you actually got a stronger hand. And so a lot of that small betting is equity denial rather than trying to get a better hand to fold. And the other component is, so there's the equity denial component. Yeah, that's my train of thought. I think that's all I wanted to say anyway. Thanks, Anonymous. Who is the poker goat, and why is it? Tridilla's not the goat. You're the goat, JG. Or you will be, apparently, in 18 months. You'll be the goat. It's all right. We'll just be waiting 18 months, and then everyone will say that JG is the greatest of all time. Okay, so Ben is asking, who do you think loses more EV in general? Massively over bluffing range. Over bluffing range versus calling range. Over folding range versus over bluffing range. I understand your question, but it's just going to depend on the bet size most of the time, and like how often is the call, how often is the fold, whether in position, out of position, etc. And on what street you're in. So it's difficult to answer that question. I do know that on average, at least pre-flop, that calling mistakes are worse than folding mistakes in terms of the impact on your EV. So pre-flop, if you're playing in a pool, or you're playing against opponents that call too much or continue too much, you're usually going to win more money than against players that fold too much. Right? So Ben, when you're looking for to play against particular players or particular types of players, in particular pools or particular sites or particular locations, if you have the choice between one where players continue too wide or continue too tight, I would much prefer to play in the place where everyone is continuing too wide, right? And it's pretty obvious when you think about it, because if they're continuing too wide, they're putting more of their stack in bad on average. Versus they continue too tight, they're only forced to put in, the 1.5 big blinds per orbit. I'm not saying that you can't make money in both those kinds of games, but you're usually just going to make more if they call too wide or continue too wide. I say call, but like continue as in like sometimes they can isolate your limp way too wide, and you make loads of money. For this challenge, like, you know how much I've made just like limp re-raising aces? It's just it's insane. Okay. All right. Last question, guys. From Anonymous, should we be familiar with hand versus hand versus range, and different EVs, different spots, or just enough to learn frequencies? Yeah, you should. You should kind of know how much equity your hand is. You should know. You should know exactly how many outs you've got all the time, and what percentage you would need to draw with those outs. Frequencies are important as well, but main thing is that you're not making EV mistakes, right? So if the frequency is 0 or 1, right, you should be taking it pretty seriously. If it's like 50-50 or 75-25, whatever, not as important. So definitely knowing which hands are in range and which hands aren't in range are important, and that's why in basically all of my quizzes, there's always one option, which is the hand in range or not, because you know it's pretty important to know exactly what your range is all the time, right? You should know that this hand shouldn't be here or should be here, or a second different line. And that question is usually pretty difficult to answer if you don't understand where your hand is in your range and where your opponent's range is at, given the particular spot that you're in. All right, one more. Why most of the hands are different between betting and very now and check and flop with button creates a checking range. Yeah, so you have the option. Okay, so the reason why they're different. So you have the option between betting or checking. Okay, so when you bet, your opponent can call, they can raise. All right, and then you can see the turn. Or if you check back, you see the turn, and your opponent can bet. Right, so the reason why, say for example, a strong hand might be indifferent between betting and checking is because if it checks back, the out of position player sees that you're weak, and so will bet into you at a high frequency or with a bigger size, or both, on the turn. Okay, so then a strong hand can trap by checking back. Or if they've got a weak hand, or if you've got a weak hand on the button, you're checking back because your hand is weak and you're trying to draw out on your opponent. Right? And if you've got a hand that's in between, it's a bit of both. Right? Sometimes you're betting for equity now, sometimes you're checking back and then hoping your opponent checks a turn so you can clearly evaluate the turn. Right? So there's a lot of lines that you can take where your hand will kind of be okay doing both things. So one example, one example is like, what's an example? Say for example, like you're on the button and then you're up against a big blind and they're just like an ace-high board, right? It's just like an ace-high kind of rack kind of board. What is the benefit for betting or checking like pocket kings or pocket queens there, right? Like pocket kings, you're not super worried about getting outdrawn by any two undercard hand, but there is still a bit of backdoor draw equity and draw equity related to pocket pairs and single pairs that have hit the board. So for example, ace-7-2 and you've got pocket kings, like why are you betting that on the flop? And like on ace-7-2 you should be betting kings like very small on the flop. So like the question is why are you betting that? Why does it make sense to bet there, and why would it also make sense to check? So betting small, so you bet just one big blind. A lot of your opponent's two undercard hands will have difficulty continuing. Some of them will continue, so you get a little bit of value there. And then on the turn, you'll be checking out the turn and seeing the river. And then what's the alternative is you can check back on the flop. You check back on the flop, and then what happens on the turn? Your opponent might bet into you, or your opponent might check. Okay? So then what happens to your EV of pocket kings if your opponent checks a second time? Well, then your EV of the kings goes up, right? You're more likely to win the pot. Or if your opponent has bet, then your EV has gone down because you're closer to indifferent. And if you make a really big bet, you're probably either indifferent or you're just folding. So the reason why your EV changes based on your opponent's split on the turn, but when you bet into your opponent's range hasn't split yet. So on the flop, your opponent will have all the strong hands and all the weak hands, and they haven't made that split yet until they either call or raise or whatever your flop bet. So the EV is going to be the same because of all of the lines that you can take in both options, right? If I've got pocket kings on like a7-2, I know my conditional EV is going to be really high if I hit a king, right? Because then I've got 3 kings, a set of kings. By checking back the turn or betting on the turn, and somewhere a king comes, right? Or it checks down, and then I have a clear value bet on the river, right? It goes check, 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 and then river I just value bet, and then get called by the middle pair, right? So that's where the EV is, right? In the check down line. You might have similar kind of EV if you bet small and then you check back on the turn and then either call a bet on the river. If you face a bet, your EV is dropped, right? So it's going to be all of those different possibilities, all the different lines that you've taken, your opponent's taken, going back to the flop. So it's about the reason why the EV is going to be the same between the two options is because in the solver, you're doing it at the correct frequency in order for your opponent's strategy to make it the same. But when you're playing against a human, it's usually not the same, right? It's going to be one or the other, which has the higher EV. And so, like, if you're playing really good poker, when you're playing against humans, like, you're going to be choosing, you're going to have to make those choices all the time. You have to make the choice which you think which option has the high EV for this particular hand at this particular time. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why the hands are different. But to recap, if you've got a strong hand, it's indifferent because you can bet now to get value and deny equity, blah, blah, blah. Or you can check back and your opponent bets the turn, thinking that you're weak and you've got some strong hands in order to defend there. Or if your opponent checks the second time on the turn, then your EV goes up as well. Or if you've got a very, very strong hand, then you can check back and then raise the turn. And then if you've got a weak hand, you can check back to try and outdraw your opponent, or you can bet as a bluff, or as like a kind of in between. And then you've got hands that are in between. They're indifferent because each of the two lines is viable for that particular hand. So yeah, studying both lines is going to be important, especially the checking line, because the checking line happens pretty frequently, or at least should happen pretty frequently. If you understand the check line, the check back line, the rest of the game makes a lot more sense, and it makes sense why the big blind overfolds to that flop bet in these kinds of spots, right? Because then you see just how weak the big blind's range actually is after you check back the flop. And how often the button can just like take a check down line and stab with air, and then the big blind has to overfold because some of that air beats the bottom of the big blind's range. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. Bebla, yeah, if you want to ask a question, go to Slido, but we're pretty much done now. We went way over time. Okay. Thanks everybody for showing up, asking questions. Hopefully you guys learned something, found this interesting. Remember, if you want a copy of the book, win a copy, I'm just giving away one randomly for free for every person who comments on the video afterwards. So yeah, please comment to get into the raffle for that. So if you're watching it now live, I don't think your comments count, but if you come back later and then comment, you will be in the raffle. And in order to see if you won the raffle or not, you have to come and watch the next video. And if you won the raffle, The person who won today was named Julian. Please send me a message on Discord, and I will send you your book. Yeah, thanks for coming, Anupam. Okay, bye bye.